It was a quiet evening in the small town of Maplewood, where life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were empty except for the occasional car passing by, and the only sound came from crickets chirping in the distance. Officer Greg Harris, a tall man with broad shoulders and years of experience under his belt, sat in his patrol car, sipping coffee while keeping an eye on the road ahead. He had been working late shifts for weeks now, but tonight felt different. Calmer, almost peaceful. As he drove down Main Street, his attention was drawn to a silver sedan swerving slightly out of its lane. At first glance, it didn't seem like much, a tired driver or maybe someone distracted. But Officer Harris knew better than to ignore even the smallest signs of trouble. Turning on his flashing lights, he pulled the vehicle over to the side of the road. The sedan came to a stop and Harris stepped out of his car, adjusting his belt as he approached the driver's window. When the glass rolled down, he saw a woman behind the wheel, Sarah Thompson. She looked pale, her hands trembling as she fumbled for her license and registration. Her eyes darted nervously between him and the dashboard, avoiding direct contact. "Ma'am," Harris began, his voice firm but not unkind. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Sarah hesitated before answering, her words barely above a whisper. I think I drifted out of my lane. I'm so sorry, officer. I've been feeling really sick today." Harris frowned. Something about her behavior struck him as odd. Most people who got pulled over were either defensive or overly polite, but Sarah seemed fragile. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "Can you step out of the vehicle, please?" he asked, his tone sharpening slightly. Sarah froze, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I can't," she stammered. "I'm disabled, and I need help getting out. Please, can we just settle this here?" Her explanation did little to ease Harris's suspicions. Instead, it fueled his frustration. In his mind, she was being difficult, possibly trying to avoid responsibility. Ignoring her plea, he repeated his demand more forcefully. "I said, step out of the car, ma'am." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she struggled to comply. With visible effort, she opened the door and leaned heavily on the frame, using her cane to steady herself. Every movement seemed painful and her breathing grew labored. Watching her struggle should have softened Harris, but instead he grew impatient. "This isn't rocket science, lady," he muttered under his breath, crossing his arms. What Harris didn't realize, and what Sarah couldn't bring herself to explain in her panic, was that this wasn't just any ordinary traffic stop. Unbeknownst to both of them, Sarah's husband, Mark Thompson, wasn't your average citizen. He was a high-ranking agent with the FBI, currently wrapping up a meeting 30 minutes away. And when Sarah managed to send him a quick text saying, "Help, there's a cop here," everything changed. Mark Thompson was no stranger to high-stakes situations. As an FBI agent, he'd faced criminals, solved complex cases, and navigated dangerous scenarios. But nothing could have prepared him for the sinking feeling that hit him when he read Sarah's message. His wife rarely reached out during work, hours unless it was urgent, and the brevity of her text sent alarm bells ringing in his head. Without wasting a second, Mark grabbed his coat and dashed toward his car. His mind raced through possibilities. Had someone followed her? Was this some kind of setup, or was it simply a misunderstanding? Whatever the case, one thing was clear. Sarah needed him, and he wasn't going to let anyone hurt her, not while he still drew breath. The drive home felt endless, each mile stretching longer than the last. Mark clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. He tried calling Sarah multiple times, but the calls went straight to voicemail. That only deepened his unease. By the time he reached their neighborhood, adrenaline coursed through his veins, sharpening his focus. When he finally arrived at the scene, his heart sank. There stood Officer Harris, towering over Sarah, who sat hunched on the curb, clutching her stomach. Her face was streaked with tears and her body trembled with fear. The sight ignited a fire within Mark, a mix of anger and protectiveness that threatened to boil over. Forcing himself to stay calm, Mark stepped out of his car and approached the scene. His badge gleamed under the streetlight as he held it up for Harris to see. "Agent Thompson, FBI," he announced, his voice steady but laced with authority. What's going on here? Harris stiffened immediately, clearly caught off guard. For a moment, he looked like a deer in headlights, unsure how to respond. Then, regaining his composure, he replied, "Sir, your wife was driving erratically. I was conducting a lawful stop." Mark studied Harris carefully, taking note of every detail. The slight tremor in his voice, the defensive posture, the way his gaze darted between Mark and Sarah. None of it added up. If Sarah had indeed been driving erratically, why hadn't Harris handled the situation with care? Why had he escalated things with someone who was clearly vulnerable? Lawful stop? Mark echoed, raising an eyebrow. You call intimidating a pregnant, disabled woman a lawful stop? Harris bristled at the accusation. I was following protocol, sir. She refused to cooperate. Before Mark could respond, Sarah spoke up, her voice trembling. Mark, I swear I didn't mean to drift. I've been feeling dizzy all day. Mark turned to her, his expression softening. It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. Turning back to Harris, Mark's demeanor shifted once again. Gone was the concerned husband. In his place stood a seasoned investigator ready to get to the bottom of things. I'll need to review your body cam footage, Mark said firmly, and I want access to your radio logs. Now. Harris hesitated, his face flushing red. There might be a technical issue with the camera, he mumbled. That response only raised more red flags for Mark. Over the years, he'd encountered countless excuses from people trying to cover their tracks. This was no exception. Technical issue? Mark repeated, his voice colder now. Funny how those always seem to happen when someone has something to hide. The tension between the two men grew palpable. Neighbors peered out of their windows, curious about the commotion. What had started as a routine traffic stop had quickly spiraled into something far more complicated and far more dangerous. For Sarah, seeing Mark arrive was both a relief and a source of guilt. She hated involving him in her problems, but at the same time, she couldn't deny how much safer she felt with him by her side. As she watched the exchange unfold, she silently prayed that this nightmare would end soon. Little did she know, the real drama was only beginning. Mark Thompson didn't wait for Officer Harris to respond. He had already made up his mind about what needed to happen next. With years of experience investigating high-stakes cases, Mark knew how to read people, and right now, everything about Harris screamed, guilty. Whether it was incompetence or something more sinister, Mark wasn't going to let this slide, not when Sarah's well-being was on the line. Officer Harris, Mark began, his tone calm but commanding. I'm taking over this situation. You will provide me with all relevant documentation immediately, including your body cam footage and radio logs. If there's a technical issue, as you claim, then we'll address that later. But for now, step aside. Harris's face reddened further, his jaw tightening. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone outside his department. But Mark's presence carried weight. He wasn't just any citizen, he was FBI, and Harris knew better than to argue with federal authority. Reluctantly, he backed off, muttering under his breath about overstepping boundaries. Mark ignored him and turned his attention to Sarah. Kneeling beside her, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. No, he didn't hit me or anything, but he scared me, Mark. I told him I couldn't get out easily because of my leg, but he kept pushing me. It felt like he didn't care. Her words struck a chord deep within Mark. As much as he wanted to comfort her, his professional instincts kicked in. This wasn't just personal, it was systemic. If Harris could treat his wife this way, what did that say about how others were treated? Especially those without someone like him to step in? Don't worry, Mark said softly. We're going to fix this, I promise. He helped Sarah stand, supporting her as she leaned on her cane. Together they walked back to their car, leaving Harris standing awkwardly by his patrol vehicle. For the first time since the incident began, Sarah allowed herself a small sigh of relief. Having Mark here changed everything. She might have been vulnerable alone, but together, they were unstoppable. Tensions rise between cop and agent once. Sarah was safely seated in the passenger seat. Mark returned to confront Harris. The officer stood stiffly, arms crossed, his expression a mix of defiance and discomfort. Clearly, he hadn't expected things to escalate this far. "I need answers," Mark said, his voice firm. "Why did you escalate the situation with a pregnant, disabled woman? Do you even realize the gravity of what you've done?" Harris bristled at the accusation. "I followed protocol, Agent Thompson. Your wife refused to comply, and I had every right to investigate further." "Refused to comply?" Mark repeated incredulously. "She explained her condition to you. She asked for help. Instead of showing compassion, you doubled down and intimidated her. That's not protocol, that's abuse of power." The two men locked eyes, neither willing to back down. Harris's pride wouldn't let him admit fault, while Mark's protective instincts wouldn't let him walk away. "You don't understand," Harris snapped. "People use excuses like disability to avoid accountability all the time. I can't afford to take chances." "And yet," Mark countered, his voice rising slightly, "you chose to ignore the fact that she's visibly disabled and 7 months pregnant. Tell me, Officer Harris, would you have handled this differently if she were able-bodied? Or is this just how you treat everyone?" Harris opened his mouth to retort but stopped himself. The question hung heavy in the air, exposing cracks in his defense. Before either man could say more, flashing lights appeared in the distance. Backup had arrived, both local police units and federal agents responding to Mark's earlier call. Within minutes, the quiet street transformed into a scene straight out of a crime drama, complete with swirling sirens and curious neighbors peeking through their curtains. Secrets uncovered. With reinforcements on site, Mark wasted no time. Digging deeper into Harris's background. Using his credentials, he accessed internal records and discovered troubling patterns. Multiple complaints had been filed against Harris over the years, many involving allegations of excessive force, particularly against vulnerable individuals. Some cases had been dismissed due to lack of evidence, while others resulted in mere reprimands. But one detail stood out. Harris had a history of targeting women. Several victims described similar experiences, being pulled over for minor infractions, subjected to aggressive questioning, and left feeling humiliated and powerless. It was chillingly consistent with what Sarah had endured tonight. Armed with this information, Mark confronted Harris again. "You've done this before, haven't you?" he demanded. "Targeted women who couldn't fight back. Is that why you pushed Sarah so hard? Because you thought she wouldn't resist?" Harris's face paled, but he remained silent. There was no denying the truth anymore. It was written all over his face. Meanwhile, Sarah sat quietly in the car, watching the chaos unfold. Though still shaken, she felt a flicker of hope. Seeing Mark stand up to Harris gave her strength, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Public attention sparks controversy by morning. Word of the confrontation spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story, dubbing it FBI versus local cop, and speculating about what really happened. Social media exploded with debates, dividing opinions sharply. Some defended Harris, arguing that law enforcement officers deserved respect regardless of circumstances. Others sided with Sarah and Mark, criticizing Harris's behavior and calling for accountability. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Justice for Disabled Women" and "Accountability Now." Among them were members of advocacy groups fighting for disability rights and police reform. They saw this case as an opportunity to shine a light on systemic issues plaguing law enforcement. For Sarah, the sudden attention was overwhelming. While grateful for the support, she struggled with anxiety and insomnia, haunted by memories of the encounter. Yet amidst the trauma, she also found resolve. Inspired by the voices rallying behind her, she decided to speak publicly about her experience. In interviews, she recounted the events of that night, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "I never imagined something like this could happen to me," she said. "But it made me realize how many others are suffering in silence. We need change, Not just for me, but for everyone. Her courage resonated deeply, drawing even more supporters to the cause. People shared their own stories of mistreatment at the hands of authorities, creating a wave of solidarity that rippled across the nation. A turning point as days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted on both sides. Harris faced internal investigations while Mark found himself scrutinized for allegedly overstepping his bounds. Critics accused him of abusing his position, claiming he had bullied a fellow officer. Supporters, however, praised him for standing up to injustice. Through it all, Mark remained steadfast. His priority wasn't revenge, it was justice. He worked tirelessly to ensure Harris faced consequences for his actions, collaborating with legal teams and advocacy groups to build a strong case. Back home, Sarah focused on healing. With Mark by her side, she slowly regained her confidence. Together, they navigated the emotional aftermath of the ordeal, leaning on each other for strength. Though scars remained, they refused to let bitterness define them. Instead, they chose to channel their pain into action. By speaking out and advocating for change, they hoped to prevent others from enduring similar hardships. And as they looked toward the future, they did so with hope, a renewed sense of purpose driving them forward. The days following the incident were a whirlwind of activity. Officer Harris found himself at the center of a storm he hadn't anticipated. What had started as a routine traffic stop, a mundane part of his job, had spiraled into a national controversy. His name was plastered across news headlines, social media posts, and protest banners. For someone who prided himself on being a good cop, this sudden scrutiny felt like betrayal. Harris tried to defend himself, insisting that he'd done nothing wrong. In interviews with his superiors, he claimed Sarah's erratic driving warranted further investigation. He argued that her reluctance to comply raised suspicions, forcing him to take control of the situation. But no matter how many times he repeated these explanations, they fell flat in the face of mounting evidence. Meanwhile, Mark Thompson continued to dig deeper. As an FBI agent, he had access to resources most civilians could only dream of. Using his connections, he uncovered even more troubling details about Harris's record. It wasn't just the complaints filed against him, it was the pattern. Harris consistently targeted vulnerable individuals, single mothers, elderly drivers, disabled citizens.
Many of these cases had been swept under the rug due to lack of concrete evidence or pressure from higher-ups. Mark shared his findings with investigative journalists, knowing that public awareness would put additional pressure on the police department
to act. The strategy worked. Within days, stories surfaced detailing Harris's history of misconduct. One victim recounted how she'd been pulled over for failing to signal a turn, only to be subjected to aggressive questioning about unrelated matters. Another described how Harris mocked her disability, refusing to accommodate her needs during a routine check. These testimonies painted a damning picture of Harris's behavior. Yet, despite the growing evidence, Harris refused to admit fault. Instead, he doubled down, accusing Mark of orchestrating a smear campaign. "This isn't justice," Harris told reporters during a tense press conference. "This is revenge. Agent Thompson used his badge to bully me because I dared to do my job." His words sparked heated debates online. Some sympathized with Harris, arguing that law enforcement officers often faced unfair criticism. Others dismissed his claims as deflection, pointing out the glaring inconsistencies in his story. A community divided. The fallout from the incident divided Maplewood. On one side were those who supported Harris, believing he was simply doing his duty. They argued that Sarah should have complied immediately, regardless of her condition. To them, Harris represented order and authority, qualities they valued deeply. On the other side were those who rallied behind Sarah and Mark. They saw the confrontation as a symptom of larger issues within law enforcement: systemic bias, lack of accountability, and abuse of power. Protesters marched through the streets chanting slogans like "Protect the vulnerable" and "No justice, no peace." For Sarah, the division hit close to home. Neighbors she'd known for years stopped speaking to her, claiming she'd brought shame to the town by airing its dirty laundry. Others went out of their way to offer support, bringing meals and leaving encouraging notes on her doorstep. "It's hard not knowing who to trust," Sarah confessed to Mark one evening. "I thought I knew everyone here. Now it feels like we're living in two different worlds." Mark wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "We can't please everyone, sweetheart. All we can do is stay true to ourselves and keep fighting for what's right." His words gave her comfort, but the weight of the situation lingered. Every knock at the door made her heart race, wondering if it was another angry neighbor, or worse, Harris himself. The body cam footage controversy. One of the biggest hurdles in resolving the case was Harris's body cam footage, or rather, the absence of it. From the beginning, Harris had claimed technical issues prevented access to the recording. But when technicians finally retrieved the file, it revealed something shocking. The camera had been turned off shortly after Harris approached Sarah's car. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Critics accused Harris of deliberately disabling the camera to cover his tracks. Supporters, however, argued that technical glitches happened all the time and shouldn't be interpreted as malicious intent. Mark wasted no time addressing the issue. During a televised interview, he held up a copy of the corrupted file, his expression grim. "This isn't just a coincidence," he said. "Officer Harris knew exactly what he was doing. By turning off his body cam, he ensured there would be no record of his actions. That's not negligence. That's obstruction." The accusation added fuel to the fire. Calls for Harris's resignation grew louder, with petitions circulating online demanding immediate action. Even some of his colleagues began distancing, themselves fearing association with a tainted reputation. Facing consequences, as the investigation dragged on, Harris's life unraveled. Suspended from duty pending review, he became a pariah in the community. Once friendly faces avoided him, and whispers followed him wherever he went. The stress took a toll on his mental health. He lost weight, struggled to sleep, and snapped at anyone who questioned him. Despite his struggles, Harris clung to denial. He insisted he was a scapegoat, a victim of circumstance caught in the crosshairs of federal power. But deep down, doubt gnawed at him. Had he crossed a line? Was he truly guilty of the accusations leveled against him? For Sarah, watching Harris fall from grace evoked mixed emotions. On one hand, she felt vindicated. Justice was finally catching up to him. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the human cost. Harris wasn't just a villain in a headline. He was a person whose life had been shattered. "It's not about ruining him," Sarah told Mark one night. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen again, to anyone." Mark nodded, understanding her perspective. "You're right. This isn't personal. It's about accountability. If we let this slide, we're sending a message that it's okay to mistreat people, and that's unacceptable." And finding strength in solidarity. Amidst the chaos, Sarah found solace in the support she received. Advocacy groups reached out, offering legal assistance and emotional counseling. Friends and strangers alike shared messages of encouragement, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Inspired by their kindness, Sarah decided to take a stand. She partnered with organizations focused on disability rights and police reform, using her platform to amplify marginalized voices. Together, they organized workshops, town halls, and awareness campaigns aimed at fostering empathy and understanding. Her efforts gained traction, drawing attention from policymakers and influencers. Lawmakers introduced bills requiring stricter oversight of law enforcement practices, including mandatory body cam usage and independent investigations of misconduct allegations. While change wouldn't happen overnight, progress was underway. For Mark, seeing Sarah transform her pain into purpose filled him with pride. She had always been strong, but this experience revealed a resilience he hadn't fully appreciated before. "You're incredible, you know that?" he said one evening as they sat together on the porch. Sarah smiled softly. "I'm just trying to make a difference, for me, for our baby, and for everyone else who deserves better." Like a new chapter. By the end of part 3, the stage was set for resolution. Harris faced mounting consequences, while Sarah and Mark emerged as symbols of courage and determination. Though challenges remained, their journey highlighted the importance of standing up against injustice, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The controversy surrounding Officer Harris reached a boiling point as the nation turned its attention to Maplewood. What had started as a routine traffic stop had become a symbol of larger societal issues: police accountability, systemic bias, and the treatment of vulnerable individuals. Every twist and turn in the case made headlines, fueling debates that spilled into living rooms, workplaces, and classrooms across the country. For Sarah Thompson, the spotlight was both empowering and exhausting. On one hand, she felt grateful for the support flooding in from strangers who resonated with her story. On the other hand, the constant attention left her drained, forcing her to relive the trauma over and over again. Each interview, each public appearance, chipped away at her emotional reserves, yet she refused to back down. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt powerless against authority. Mark Thompson stood by her side through it all, shielding her from unnecessary pressure while ensuring their voices were heard. Together they became a formidable team, challenging not only Harris but also the system that had allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. A nation divided. As the case unfolded, opinions splintered along predictable lines. Supporters of law enforcement rallied behind Harris, arguing that he was being unfairly targeted because of his badge. They claimed officers faced impossible expectations, caught between enforcing laws and avoiding public backlash. "If we keep attacking cops for doing their jobs," one supporter wrote on social media, "who will protect us?" Critics, however, saw Harris's actions as emblematic of deeper problems within policing. They pointed to statistics showing disproportionate rates of misconduct complaints against marginalized groups, including disabled individuals and people of color. Protesters carried signs reading, "Disabled Lives Matter," and "Cops should protect, not harm." The divide grew wider as new evidence emerged. When surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store surfaced, it painted an even clearer picture of what had transpired that night. The video showed Harris aggressively handling Sarah despite her visible distress, ignoring her pleas for help. It went viral almost instantly, sparking outrage across the country. "Watching that video broke my heart," said one viewer during a televised panel discussion. "How can anyone justify treating a pregnant, disabled woman like that? This isn't about whether you support the police, it's about basic human decency." Others countered that the video lacked context, insisting that Harris might have had valid reasons for his behavior. The debate raged on, polarizing communities and testing relationships. Families argued over dinner tables, friends unfollowed each other on social media, and tensions simmered beneath the surface of everyday interactions. Officer Harris's downfall. Caught in the eye of the storm, Harris struggled to salvage his reputation. His initial defiance gave way to desperation as the weight of public opinion crushed him. He appeared on talk shows, pleading his innocence and accusing Mark of orchestrating a witch hunt. "I'm not perfect," Harris admitted during one particularly heated interview, "but I'm not a monster either. Everyone makes mistakes, but instead of giving me a chance to explain, they've decided I'm guilty before the facts are in." Despite his attempts to sway public sentiment, Harris's explanations fell flat. The damage had already been done. The combination of damning evidence, mounting complaints, and relentless media coverage left little room for redemption. Eventually, Harris's superiors had no choice but to act. Facing immense pressure from both the public and higher-ranking officials, they suspended him indefinitely pending further investigation. For many, it was a step in the right direction, but others demanded more. "He shouldn't just lose his job," said a protester outside the police station. "He should face criminal charges. What he did wasn't just unethical, it was cruel." While formal charges remained uncertain, Harris's career was effectively over. Stripped of his badge and ostracized by colleagues, he retreated from public life, disappearing into obscurity. Healing and advocacy. For Sarah, the aftermath of the incident brought mixed emotions. While justice seemed within reach, the scars ran deep. She struggled with anxiety, often waking up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, haunted by memories of Harris towering over her. Simple tasks, like driving or running errands, filled her with dread. But amidst the pain, Sarah found strength. Inspired by the outpouring of support she received, she resolved to channel her trauma into something meaningful. Partnering with advocacy groups, she launched a campaign aimed at reforming police practices and protecting vulnerable communities. "We need policies that prioritize compassion and accountability," Sarah told a packed auditorium during a town hall meeting. "No one should have to go through what I did, not because of their disability, race, gender, or any other factor. Change starts with us." Her words resonated deeply, earning standing ovations and sparking conversations about how to create safer, more equitable systems. Lawmakers took notice, introducing legislation requiring mandatory de-escalation training for officers, stricter oversight of misconduct allegations, and increased protections for disabled individuals interacting with law enforcement. Mark played a crucial role in these efforts, leveraging his FBI connections to push for systemic reforms. Together, he and Sarah became voices of hope, proving that even in the darkest moments, resilience could lead to transformation. A turning point. For Maplewood, the ripple effects of the case extended far beyond Sarah and Harris. In Maplewood, residents began reevaluating their relationship with law enforcement. Community leaders organized forums where citizens could voice concerns directly to police officials. Officers participated in workshops focused on empathy and cultural sensitivity, learning to approach situations with greater understanding and care. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. Old wounds don't heal overnight, but progress was undeniable. Neighbors who had once avoided Sarah now greeted her warmly, apologizing for their earlier silence. Children drew pictures of superheroes inspired by her courage, taping them to her front door as tokens of admiration. Even Harris's suspension served as a wake-up call for the department. Recognizing the need for change, senior officers implemented new protocols designed to prevent similar incidents in the future. Body cams became mandatory, and internal affairs units gained independence to ensure impartial investigations. Looking toward the future. By the time the dust settled, Sarah and Mark realized they had accomplished more than they ever imagined. What had begun as a terrifying ordeal had transformed into a catalyst for change. Their story reminded people of the power of perseverance, the idea that even when faced with overwhelming odds, standing up for what's right can make a difference. For Sarah, the journey reinforced her belief in the goodness of humanity. Despite the hatred and division she witnessed, she also saw countless acts of kindness and solidarity. Strangers sent letters of encouragement, offering words of comfort and praise. Friends stepped up to help with daily chores, allowing her to focus on healing. "I never thought I'd survive this," Sarah confessed to Mark one evening as they sat together under the stars. "But now I feel stronger than ever. We're not just surviving, we're thriving." Mark smiled, taking her hand in his. "That's because you're amazing, Sarah. You've taught me so much about bravery and resilience. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Hope on the horizon. As Part 4 draws to a close, the groundwork for resolution is laid. Harris faces the consequences of his actions, while Sarah and Mark emerge as symbols of hope and activism. Though challenges remain, their unwavering determination inspires others to join the fight for justice. Months had passed since the fateful night that changed everything for Sarah and Mark Thompson. The once quiet town of Maplewood was now a symbol of both division and unity, depending on who you asked. For some, it represented the flaws in the system, a reminder of how easily power could be abused. For others, it stood as proof that collective action could lead to meaningful change. The legal proceedings against Officer Harris finally reached their conclusion. After weeks of deliberation, an independent review board delivered its verdict. Harris was found guilty of misconduct and abuse of power. Though he avoided prison time due to mitigating circumstances, his career in law enforcement ended permanently. He was stripped of his badge, fined heavily, and ordered to undergo mandatory counseling. For many, the punishment felt insufficient. Protesters argued that losing his job wasn't enough, that Harris should face criminal charges for the trauma he inflicted. Others believed it was a step in the right direction, acknowledging that accountability, however imperfect, was still progress. Sarah watched the news coverage from her living room, holding her newborn daughter, Hope, close to her chest. She felt a mix of emotions, relief that justice had been served, but also sadness for the lives affected by Harris's actions, including his own. "It's not about revenge," she told Mark softly. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen again, to anyone." Mark nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You're right. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Almosu, a legacy of change. While Harris faded into obscurity, Sarah and Mark emerged as champions of reform. Their advocacy work gained national recognition, inspiring lawmakers to introduce sweeping changes to policing practices. New legislation mandated stricter oversight of officers, including independent investigations of misconduct allegations and mandatory training in de-escalation techniques. One of the most significant victories came when Congress passed the Vulnerable Individuals Protection Act, a bill co-sponsored by several legislators inspired by Sarah's story. The act required law enforcement agencies to implement protocols specifically designed to assist disabled individuals during interactions. It also allocated funding for community outreach programs aimed at building trust between police departments and marginalized groups. Sarah became the face of the movement, traveling across the country to share her experiences and advocate for systemic change. Her speeches resonated deeply with audiences, blending vulnerability with resilience. "No one deserves to feel powerless," she said during a keynote address at a national conference. "We all have a voice, and together, we can create a world where everyone feels safe and respected." Her message struck a chord, sparking conversations about empathy, accountability, and the role of law enforcement in society. Schools incorporated her story into curriculums, teaching students about civic responsibility and the importance of standing up against injustice. Personal healing and growth. Despite her public success, Sarah's journey toward healing remained deeply personal. The trauma of that night lingered, manifesting in sleepless nights and moments of anxiety. But with Mark's unwavering support and the arrival of baby Hope, she found solace in the little joys of life. Hope became a beacon of renewal for the couple. Her laughter filled their home with warmth, reminding them of the beauty that could emerge from even the darkest times. Watching her grow gave Sarah a renewed sense of purpose. "She's our miracle," Sarah whispered one evening as she rocked Hope to sleep. "Every time I look at her, I'm reminded of why we fought so hard. For her future, and for everyone else's." Mark smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Sarah's face. "You're incredible, you know that? You've turned pain into purpose in ways I never imagined." Their bond grew stronger through shared adversity. They learned to lean on each other during difficult moments, finding strength in their partnership. Together they navigated the complexities of parenthood while continuing their advocacy work, proving that love and determination could overcome any obstacle. Ripple effects in Maplewood. Back in Maplewood, the case left an indelible mark on the community. Residents who had once been divided began coming together, united by a desire for positive change. Community leaders organized regular forums where citizens could engage directly with police officials, fostering open dialogue and mutual understanding. Officers underwent extensive training focused on cultural sensitivity and conflict resolution. Many welcomed the opportunity to improve their skills, recognizing the importance of rebuilding trust. Slowly but surely, relationships improved, creating a safer and more inclusive environment for everyone. Even Harris's downfall served as a cautionary tale. His story became part of training modules, used to illustrate the consequences of unchecked bias, and aggression. Officers were reminded that their actions carried weight, not just legally but morally, and that true leadership meant prioritizing compassion over control. Looking ahead, as time passed, Sarah and Mark reflected on how far they'd come. What had started as a terrifying ordeal had transformed into a journey of growth and transformation. They had faced unimaginable challenges, but in doing so, they had discovered strengths they didn't know they possessed. "I never thought I'd survive this," Sarah admitted during a quiet moment with Mark. "But now I feel stronger than ever. We've made mistakes, sure, but we've also grown in ways I couldn't have imagined." Mark squeezed her hand gently. "That's what life is about, learning, growing, and finding meaning in the chaos. And no matter what happens next, we'll face it together." Their optimism extended beyond themselves. They envisioned a future where stories like theirs wouldn't exist, a world where systems protected instead of harmed, where empathy triumphed over prejudice. While achieving such a vision would take time, they remained committed to the cause, knowing that every small step mattered. A message of hope. In the years that followed, Sarah and Mark continued to inspire others. Their story became a testament to the power of perseverance, reminding people that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and compassion could spark change. For Sarah, the experience reinforced her belief in the goodness of humanity. Despite the hatred and division she witnessed, she also saw countless acts of kindness and solidarity. Strangers sent letters of encouragement, friends offered help without hesitation, and communities rallied behind her. "We're stronger together," she often said during interviews. "No one should have to fight alone. When we stand united, there's nothing we can't achieve." As Hope grew older, Sarah and Mark instilled in her the values they held dear: empathy, resilience, and a commitment to justice. They hoped she would carry those lessons forward, contributing to a brighter, more equitable future. Closing thoughts. By the end of their journey, Sarah and Mark realized that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing, it was about creating a world where such wrongs couldn't occur in the first place. Their fight had transformed not only their lives, but also the lives of countless others. Though scars remained, they refused to let bitterness define them. Instead, they chose to focus on the positive impact they could make. In doing so, they proved that even the darkest moments could give rise to light, if only we dared to believe in hope. And as they looked toward the horizon, they did so with gratitude for the past that shaped them, the present that strengthened them, and the future that awaited them.